as promised, I am back to do a show on Australia's real estate and construction and housing market. I had a ridiculous conflict of interest and two fantasy football drafts at the same time. Trust me, I've never done that before, and I never want to do that again. So here I'm back to talk about the Australian housing market. So my friend Diana on Facebook, she is the real expert on this. She lives in Australia. I think she grew up in China, and she lives in Australia for a long time now. And she tracks the stories on this, and she's been sending me these stories, just an insane amount of these ones. And finally, I thought I should do a show on this, just because if you only read the headlines on some of these stories, it is freaking nuts, guys. This is why I wanted to do a show on this. And by the way, we're not going to get a chance. I have over a dozen windows open with stories, and Diana finds these stories in different Australian publications and on YouTube. She finds them, like, at least a couple of them a day. This is how crazy things are getting. So let me read this story first, because it's the most recent one and it's freshest in my memory. So this one is from news.com.au, or I guess it's the Australian Daily Telegraph. And it's from yesterday, August 31st, 2019, from Aidan Devine. This is nuts. This is like crazy real estate stories of like cost per square feet in Toronto, cost per square feet in Vancouver, cost per square feet probably almost as much as Hong Kong. So collapsing hovels selling for up to $2 million as Sydney auction market turns red hot again. Panicked property seekers have been snapping up nearly anything for sale, paying up to $2 million for homes with no roofs, termite damage, and other features that make them uninhabitable. So basically then you're paying just for the land because it's going to have to get bulldozed. It's not even a fixer-upper. It's a complete and total teardown, which means if you're a real estate investor, your costs are going to be even higher. That means people, in my opinion, if they're buying all cash, they're speculating on higher land prices. If they're buying with a mortgage, that's even more dangerous too. But a lot of Chinese money has been going into the Australian real estate market for well over a decade now. Australia, in proximity, is very close to China. So a lot of money from mainland China has been parked in Australian real estate for a long time. Very similar principles to Vancouver. Australia and Vancouver were two of the most popular places to park Chinese money. So the largest higher real estate prices in Australia are in Sydney and Melbourne. I think Brisbane might be third. And there's tons of let me read the head. First of all, let me read this article. I'll read it, and then I'll go through some of the headlines and some of the other details. The headlines, some of them are just like eye-popping. And there is some good coverage that's coming out on this, but apparently a lot of the Australian mainstream media wants to blame foreigners. I'm seeing articles that are blaming foreigners for causing the real estate bubble to pop and other stuff. But there's very serious issues and very serious red flags about the Australian construction market, Australian real estate, Australian housing. The Australian Central Banker recently, the Reserve Bank of Australia, has talked about going down to zero interest rate policy, or ZIRP, and also negative interest rate policy, or NIRP. And Diana even sent me some stories recently about Australian politicians talking about going to a cashless society. There's just a lot of crazy things that remind me of the housing bubble in the US from 2002 to 2007, whether that's rushing construction, whether that's home builders offering people like free groceries. I've seen a screenshot of a Facebook ad from an Australian real estate developer that builds like condos, offering people free groceries for a year with an asterisk. I've seen screenshots of this. Just crazy stuff. There's also a lot of problems with construction of buildings. Diana has sent me tons and tons of articles on this. There was a recent special by ABC News In Depth. I guess that's ABC News Australia. There's a video out called Cracking Up, Investigating Australia's Apartment Building Crisis by Four Corners. It just came out a couple weeks ago on August 19th, and it's got over 150,000 views on it. So there is some coverage of this. The 60 Minutes Australia, I remember, I think early this year or late last year, they ran a segment on the Opal Tower and how that was rushed. And the Opal Tower, it's truly a tragedy. It's in Sydney. Some people put their life savings into getting like the best views in Sydney. retiring in a beautiful condo there, and they can't sell it now. Just crazy stuff. So let me continue with the article. Uninhabitable homes with termite damage, collapsed ceilings, and sagging walls riddled with cracks have been fetching big prices, and the latest sign the Sydney auction market has turned red hot again. Property experts said the unsightly homes were attracting inflated prices because of a crippling shortage of housing at a time of rising competition from buyers capitalizing on interest rate cuts. Only about 430 properties went to auction Saturday, an unusually low number for a weekend so close to spring, and preliminary indicators suggested nearly 8 in 10 sold under the hammer. So these things are literally, it sounds a lot like how basically for a while in the US, I'm not sure if it's still happening nearly as much, but my best friend is a real estate agent here in this area, in the DC metro area, at one of the best firms. And I do speak to other real estate agents because I have contacts with real estate investors. And I would hear lots of stories over the years, especially the last like 7 to 10 years, of Chinese families coming, some of them not even able to speak English, some of them where the real estate agents had to learn Mandarin or bring in someone who could speak Mandarin, and then someone would get off a plane and a house would be purchased in under 24 hours, sometimes more than one house, and it was either a briefcase of money, and the Chinese real estate investor, a lot of it, like it was almost sight unseen, and it would be they were willing to pay $50,000 or more over the asking price, and a lot of times no mortgage, just cash. So this has gone on. I'm sure very similar stories exist in Australia. It sounds like there is a lot of Chinese money that has left mainland China, and probably also Hong Kong now with all the problems in Hong Kong as well. But a lot of that money has gone into the two primary choices for a lot of real estate investments for Chinese, besides like Orange County in the United States and some other US locations, seems to be Vancouver and also Australia. So let me continue with the article. This was similar to weekly auction clearance rates for most of August, which hit a 2-year high of about 78%. CoreLogic data showed. Wow, the pictures, guys, of these dilapidated homes are nuts. These things are literally falling. I would not wish an enemy to live there. They look like a crack den. They look like a crack den or, what was it, meth lab almost. They look that bad. Some buyers were responding to the heated market conditions with a sense of panic and were bidding up prices to leapfrog their rivals and snag a home before any potential boom, auctioneer said. So this is the fever pitch. This could be the blow off top because people, it's greater fool. It was just repeated, auctioneer said. So if they're betting on leapfrogging their rivals and snag a home before any potential boom, it's a greater fool theory. They're only betting on higher prices. They're not. The traditional Western investing of real estate, guys, is to invest for cash flow. Okay? So if you're buying a property, it's to upgrade the property enough to get a higher rental property income so it covers your property taxes and your mortgage. And you can then take, normally with U.S. real estate investors, for a smaller single-family home that's a starter home, you can expect, if you know what you're doing as a real estate investor, this is not financial advice, just my opinion speaking to other real estate investors, you can, and experts like Jason Hartman, who has a really good libertarian real estate investor podcast that teaches you how to do it. He also sells educational materials for real estate investors here in the United States. And he does take, he has a lot of foreign clients who own a lot of rental properties here in the U.S. But normally for rental property owners, you can expect between like $800 and $2,000 per month. If you know what you're doing, it's not easy work. But if you put in the work and know what you're doing, you can make a lot of extra money per month as a rental property owner. So there is a lot of income potential there. There is a lot of risk. But I know a lot of successful people who own rental properties. It's not always the best time to buy them. Depends which city and state you're buying them. There's always the risk if you buy them in Houston, you could have Hurricane Harvey and you can get in trouble and then you have to deal with insurance. So there's always risk with stuff like that. But there is a lot of income potential. The best way, if you know what you're doing, almost all successful people who are worth a lot of money, they all have good real estate holdings. Okay, let me continue with the article. Fixer-uppers were among the most sought-after properties because they allowed buyers to put a personal mark on homes through a renovation or knockdown rebuild project, they said. The pictures, guys, you have to see this article. The pictures here, none of these look like fixer-uppers. They all look like immediate teardowns. Bresic Whitney agent Chris Nunn said fixer-uppers were popular in, quote, any market, but were getting particularly good results at the moment. Here we go, guys. Quote, FOMO, fear of missing out, or FOMO, is back because there are a lot more buyers than properties, Mr. Nunn said. As a very astute, contrarian, smart investor who does not like chasing higher prices, when I hear that, that means we're getting close to a top for the bubble. Fear of missing out on Australian properties. Okay, let me continue with the article. Quote, with rundown homes, you get a mix of owner-occupiers, developers, and builders all putting in offers. They can spend a lot in a market like this because their renovation will be built into the price they sell at. No, they won't, because this is assuming that real estate prices only go up. This is the same false assumption that people in the U.S. made from 2002 to 2007, that people in China are making now. My God, I can't believe they're repeating basically almost all the red flags for a real estate bubble, and towards the top, they're all being put in this article. Okay, Mr. Nunn Saturday sold a derelict Roselle home, I'm not familiar with the Roselle neighborhood in Sydney, at auction for $2.01 million. Okay, $460,000 over the asking price. And said there was a, quote, ton of buyer inquiries over the marketing campaign. Wow. Sorry, I just whacked my chair there. I've gotten just really overwhelmed to hear how nuts people are willing to overpay. $460,000, so that's over 20%. They paid over 20%. Wow. 20 bidders registered, and the buyer, a builder, only inspected the property for the first time on the day. So the builder only, oh my God, this just keeps getting more ridiculous. 20 bidders registered, and the buyer, a builder, only inspected the property for the first time on the day. So the builder is either betting on higher land prices or he already knows he's going to tear it down. A burnt house in North Parramatta sold under the hammer earlier in the day for $785,000 after attracting the interest of 8 registered bidders. Ray White, selling agent Rowan Threadgold, said the price for the Bourke Street house seared in a kitchen... Yeah, said the price for the Bourke Street house seared in a kitchen fire represented land value. Okay, so it's all about the land. There is no roof. Everything was stripped back, he said. Some of the people who viewed it and said they weren't sure what they were supposed to be looking at. In Newtown, a dilapidated cottage on Denison Street fetched over $1.1 million at auction despite the agent declaring the home impossible to live in. Quote, you couldn't restore it. The kitchen is gone. The sidewall was falling down, but the market has done a complete 360. A complete 360. That you normally don't hear people say 360. Normally it's a 180. Okay, well, I'll just read the quote. That doesn't sound right, but okay. Complete 360, so there was lots of interest. Urbane Properties, Charles Bailey said. Derelict houses on Spencer Street and Kensington Road in Summerhill sold for $1.292 million and $1.08 million respectively. Okay, so I could go on and on with the pictures here, guys, are insane. There's been improved confidence from buyers since the federal election result in May, but sellers haven't responded nearly as quick, so stock is decreasing. Usually there would be a lot more sellers signing up for September and October by now. And let me just read some of these headlines here. There's a lot. So someone told me to look up this guy named Ross Taylor. I never heard of him. He is the CEO of Fletcher Building and Construction. It's a large firm in Australia. And he says the Australian housing construction market won't begin to recover until 2020, 2021. And more cuts in interest rates are unlikely to drive a quicker rebound. Actually, I would think that this article came out in June 26th of 2019. It's looking like he's wrong because there's a lot of flight capital leaving potential. It looks like a lot of flight capital leaving China now. So that could be why he's going to be wrong. but he's not. He's doing the developing, one of the developers here, and he's not. Another headline from August 16th, 2019 by Charlotte Grieve. Unbelievable nightmare cracks, creaks, and groans force tower dwellers to sell. Michael and Catherine Toronto. Yeah, Toronto first heard their walls creak, bang, and moan on a spring night in 2014. The noises made it feel as if they were in the hull of a ship and continued until morning. It was the first of many sleepless nights for the couple, who were to face 5 years of being tormented by the noises, which strained their marriage and eventually forced them to sell their dream home on the 12th floor of a Melbourne apartment tower. So it's not just a couple. There's so many of these stories of construction problems now in Sydney, Melbourne, elsewhere. Diane is tracking this. I'm not an Australian housing analyst, so I'm just following this along from a far distance. But if I was doing this full time, I would just tracking the Australian housing market, I'd be in shock. After countless failed rectification works, the ongoing creaking noises had turned their home into an unbelievable nightmare. The couple will pull up stumps at the end of this month. The Prima Pearl Tower is the second residential tower in Melbourne built by construction giant Multiplex that has been plagued by creaking noises. Last month, The Age, which I guess is The Age and the news.com.au, so the age.com-au also covers a lot of the Australian housing market, better probably than the regular Australian mainstream media. Last month, The Age revealed residents in South Bank's Australia 108 building had to put up with similar noises. Multiplex said the problems have been fixed in Prima Pearl except for in times of, quote, extreme weather. Following a years-long research project, the company promised the situation would improve for residents in Australia 108 once the building was complete. Yeah, it would really, really worry me if I had put a lot of money into one of these and I was hearing all these problems. There definitely sounds like very serious construction defects. Oh, they were actually able. So this couple paid $930,000 for their 2-bedroom apartment and invested a further $100,000 in furnishing and renovations. But they didn't lose too much money. They reluctantly sold the property for $955,000, which is way better than what happened to the people in the Opal Tower in Sydney. The people in the Opal Tower in Sydney, I don't know if they're ever going to get any of their money back. It looks real bad. There was people who put $800,000 or more in Australian dollars of their life savings into beautiful condos in the Opal Tower, and some of them might never get any of their money back. There's going to be lawsuits, clearly, but they're not going to be able to sell their condo or their apartment for anything close to what they paid. Just truly a tragic story. Okay, I'll attach links to these stories. I'm going to read some more. I have about a dozen of these open. Hopefully my computer does not crash. Another story from August 13th, 2019 from news.com-au. They seem to be one of the top news agencies covering this. Mascot Tower owners say NSW government should pay for repairs. An owner from the troubled Mascot Towers has broken down in tears when describing the pain the evacuation has caused to his family. An owner from the troubled Mascot Towers has broken down... Okay, describing the pain... Okay, they just repeated the exact sentence from the headline. Speaking at a NSW parliamentary inquiry today, Vijay Vital began crying when he talked about how the troubled Sydney Tower had affected his daughter. So it's not just Opal Tower, guys. This Mascot Towers, too. This is becoming very serious to me. An inquiry into the regulation of building standards, quality, and disputes in NSW, I'm not familiar with what exactly that means, began today after a series of incidents involving many of my Australian listeners will put it in the live chat comments, I'm sure. Began today after a series of incidents involving damaged unit buildings. Residents of the Mascot Complex's 132 apartments have been forced to stay elsewhere since the building was evacuated in mid-June due to cracking in the primary support structure and facade masonry. Wow, that sounds really bad. Quote, I appear here as a parent and my child has asked me when they can go home, he said as he became emotional and started crying. After we were evacuated, we had the general meeting where they asked us to pay $1.1 million to the sinking fund. Wow, so they asked the residents to contribute even more. He said the sinking fund had been spent on costs related to the evacuation. Describing the mounting costs, yes, where does it stop? Unit owner Alton Chen also spoke at the inquiry, saying mounting costs of about $80,000 initially to each lot in the building were just the beginning. Wow, so they made the property owners pay more money. Let's talk about a sunk cost. This is tragedy, guys. It's a very bad tragedy. Mr. Chen said he saw owners as victims of continued government deregulation. He said when he bought his property at Mascot Towers, he believed the unit was still under warranty and went through every page of the report. We pay our tax, our stamp duty, and this is where we are. Mr. Chen said, we've done everything we can as law-abiding citizens. A lot of us aren't investors. This isn't our 10th or 11th property. Buildings are protected by a 7-year warranty period. What about us? Where is our protection? It's not as simple as we just go bankrupt. A lot of us can't afford to go bankrupt. We're looking at tens of millions of dollars in repairs. If the assistance package stops, we're paying mortgages for somewhere we can't live. Yeah, the average person can't withstand that. Which means then probably, unfortunately, their marriage could be ruined too, and just a lot of horrible, horrible collateral damage. Financially, professionally, personally, emotionally. He said owners were also facing insurance premium hikes. Lawyers, if we go down that track, it's going to cost a lot of money too. Yeah, they want the government's help. This is the problem. The government was supposed to have prevented this stuff from the beginning. Okay, let me find another article. I have a lot of them. I don't want to crash. I don't want to crash my computer. I have so many windows open. Okay, this article is from July 8th, 2019. This is the Commonwealth Bank of Australia. They've been reporting pretty bad earnings for the full year 2019. 8% drop in their statutory net profit to sit at 8.57 billion Australian dollars. The bank is reporting a decline. The bank looks like it's been in, the share prices have been falling lately. I'm wondering what's going to happen to the Australian banks, because it looks like they were getting into a lot of the same games. Not quite as much mortgage-backed securities and other derivatives, but I hear some of that. But I hear a lot of people in Australia, especially in the major cities, are starting to become underwater in their mortgages. And Diana has been sending these stories, too, about Australian families who are so underwater with their mortgages that they can barely make ends meet, and shoplifting has increased and crime is increasing. It's very interesting stuff. Okay, let me pull up some more. I have so many stories, so I'm sorry, I'm going out of order here. This story is from June 26, 2019. Australia's property bubble shows the lessons of 2008 crash haven't been learned, by Grace Blakely at the New Statesman America. The financial crisis did not spell the end of financialization. Australian households are among the most indebted in the world. When she visited Australia and turned on the TV in her hotel room, she was bombarded with advertisements for mortgage refinancing, equity withdrawal, and cheap credit cards. One ad depicted a woman talking elatedly about how she'd managed to pay off $90,000 worth of credit card debt in over just 3 years. In St. Kilda, a trendy district in the south of Melbourne, entire streets were covered in boarded-up shops plastered with the logos of various real estate companies. On one street, someone had taken a Sharpie and written, quote, "lower your rent," end quote, over every sign, and homeless men and women could be found sheltering in the unused doorways. A few days later, she recounted her experience to one of the organizers of the political conference she attended, telling them that all the signs pointed to a property boom that was running out of steam. He nodded in agreement. Quote, "My house is worth no more today than it was when I bought it 2 years ago." After 2008, policymakers across the world claim to have learned the lessons of the financial crisis. They recognized that the pre-crisis approach to regulation had worked. Rather than predictable risks in individual institutions, they realized they should have been focusing on unpredictable systemic risks. I don't think I agree with that, because they pretended that they learned something from the crisis, and then it looks to me like the bankers in Australia went and copied what the bankers in the US and the mortgage companies in the US did. That's what it looks like to me. And there's actually a whistleblower. Let's see here. Let me pull up the article if I can find it. Okay, this article is from, I think there's multiple whistleblowers. This guy's named Graham Holm, Graeme Holm. This article is from November 18th of 2018. Whistleblower for ASIC says Watchdog abandoned him to deal with online harassment alone, by Josh Robertson. So this is from, this publication is abc.net.au. A former banker who's suffering repeated online attacks on his character and integrity after becoming a witness for the Australian Securities and Investments Commission has warned other people to, quote, run like they're on fire, end quote, if asked to provide evidence of financial scammers. Graham Holmes said damaging online harassment of him and his finance business began just hours after the corporate watchdog announced a ban on a mortgage broker based on his testimony. ASIC, which pursued the broker as part of its investigation of a $65 million property Spruiking, Spruiking racket, has said it regrets the harassment and defamation he has faced, but it cannot help. The case has prompted further calls for a national whistleblower protection authority. Sounds like new whistleblower laws were just passed in Australia in the last couple months, but I'm not sure how much they're going to help because I've heard of other whistleblowers. There was one government agent who was warning his bosses, and the Australian government went after him. This was, I think this was last 6 or 8 months. The guy came forward, and I don't know if the Australian mainstream media was accurately covering it. The guy said that he reported all this mortgage fraud abuse to his bosses, and his bosses intentionally wouldn't look at it. And instead told him to shut up and stop talking about it and don't go to the press. And he went to the press, and I think his life was ruined. I think he had a divorce. I forgot the guy's name. I don't think it's Graham Holmes. I think it's another guy. I was looking for the article. I could not find it. I found a lot of other articles instead. Okay, let me continue with the whistleblower here. I guess you would say ASIC has what they needed. They got their prosecution and their evidence, and good luck to me. I just have to deal with it, and so do my staff and my clients. Don't return their calls. Do not engage. They will not support you. You may think that you're doing the right thing, but it will hurt you in the long run, and they won't protect you for being a whistleblower. Mr. Holmes said his lawyer had told him not to turn witness against the mortgage broker after ASIC first called him in late 2016. He had worked at Westpac when the broker submitted loan applications to the bank containing information ASIC found to be false. ASIC did advise that they had the powers to compel me to give evidence, and throughout the process, going backwards and forwards with ASIC, eventually it felt like the right thing to do and to be a good corporate citizen. I was one of the only professional services people that provided testimony to ASIC, so I believe it may have been fairly crucial. Mr. Holmes said the online smear campaign, which began in February of 2018, had plunged his Infinity Group business into costly damage control and had scared off customers. He said the attacks had escalated to include disgusting, inflammatory, false, vulgar videos, photos, false complaints, you name it. And so he lost a lot of business. Just really sad. Fears of defects in Melbourne's tallest tower. So this, I think, is the 108 building. Yep, Australia's 108 building. This story is from July 26, 2019. Australia's housing market was valued at over $7 trillion in, let's see here, in 2018. I'm not sure exactly what it's valued at now, but according to one of my podcast listeners, he said that Australia construction and real estate is a very large portion of their GDP. So what do you think is going to happen with Australian banks? Does the Australian government, does the Reserve Bank of Australia, which is Australia's central bank, do they have enough ammunition to protect their banks? Or is it going to be time to make a phone call to Jerome Powell at the Federal Reserve and ask for currency swap lines? For all I know, because there is no transparency, honesty, or integrity with the current global banking system, this could already be happening. We may never find out. Hey, Ron, thank you for the $2 super chat. I appreciate it. Harmony, you're in Australia? She says, housing here is unobtainium without debt slavery, pure and simple. Yeah, I have a lot of listeners in Australia. There was a couple listeners who were writing really nasty things about me when I said that Australia has a property bubble and a real estate bubble. This guy was even arguing with me that the empty concrete shells in China are good, which is just ridiculous. I've explained from a Western real estate investor's perspective. I've told some of my friends this who are Western real estate investors about how Chinese invest in real estate with the empty concrete shells, and they can't keep a straight face. They just, I'm not even done telling them about it, and they just start laughing at me. They're like, how do you make any money for to upgrade the property? How do you make any money to maintain the property? If you're not getting cash flow, how do you pay off your mortgage? If you're not getting rental property income, how do you afford the maintenance capex on the property you own? Well, technically in China you don't own it. It's a 7-year lease, but people view it as ownership. Thanks, Stephen, for the super chat. I appreciate it. So I could go on and on. I'll just read some more headlines here. There's so many articles to talk about. So in January 1st of 2019, Australia had the housing prices declined. They fell at the fastest rate in a decade. Sydney and Melbourne properties have dropped. Sydney properties dropped 11.1% and Melbourne dropped 7.2% respectively compared with the 2017 peak. And it sounds like, guys, that now that this has rallied, that these prices have rallied again. So it looked like 2017 was going to be potentially the bust, that 2017 was the peak. And then it seemed, after it fell a while, and then now it started to rally again. And I think a lot of this, guys, has to do with flight capital out of mainland China. There's other real estate bubbles. I don't want to look. I cover a lot of these topics. It's not just Australia, in my opinion. Also Vancouver. Vancouver, if you're not familiar with what happened in Vancouver, finally the Vancouver citizens were able to get the politicians to do something, and I'm not sure if it's the right thing to do, but the politicians in Vancouver passed, I think, a 10% empty house tax. But the Chinese money and the money from organized crime and drug cartels that was going into Vancouver, along with the Chinese money, was causing rents and home ownership prices to just go through the roof in Vancouver. Estimated cost to fix Aussie construction defects are $1 trillion. Where did you see that? Because their housing market is worth around $7 trillion now. That's a lot of screw ups. I mean, that level in the United States, outside of maybe California, where there's a bunch of corrupt. I grew up in California for a long time, and there was a lot of corrupt construction contractors there. My dad was involved. He built a house for my family. He helped build, and he was hiring like these the architect, the contractors, subcontractors, and there was literally people in California that my dad would put down a deposit of like $10,000 or $20,000, and the people would do little or no work, maybe half the work at most, and just take the money and run. And this is very common in California. There was actually a show that came out. Adam Carolla did a show about this. This is so pervasive in California. He did a show about it called Catch a Contractor. Because California, I don't think, throws a lot of these corrupt construction people in prison. But in a lot of other states in the United States, if for bad construction work, if you build a building or you build a house and it's defective and you committed gross negligence and you knowingly did that, you're risking potentially, if people die, you're looking at gross negligence criminal charges if people die. And you're looking at tort lawsuits, enormous lawsuits for potentially wrongful death or other damages if people die. Home improvement fraud is big business until people get in Western countries die or get seriously injured. Then you're looking at lawsuits and potential criminal charges. Look, it's pervasive in California with the construction industry. Adam Carolla had a show. I'm not sure if it's still on. It was on Spike TV for years. Carl says the Chinese money will slow to Australia soon. Maybe. It doesn't appear to be slowing now if there's that many bidders in Australia. Thank you again to my 100 plus Patreon account contributors. I have almost 150 now. Things have really turned around in the last 3 or 4 months. I really appreciate it. Also to my half dozen or so people who are monthly on PayPal, and the people who send me one-time tips through my website, the wallstreetformeanstreet.com website, through the PayPal donation link there. I really appreciate it. I know times are tough for everyone, or almost everyone, unless you're a hedge fund manager or apparently you're in Australian real estate. If you don't have any money to contribute and you want this content to continue, just hit the like button and we'll keep rolling with other interesting topics about investing in the economy. So we'll see. This is something that we can monitor. The amount of stories on this, guys, about all the construction defects and people grossly overpaying in the major Australian cities is insane. I don't feel like talking about Triffin's Dilemma now. I could do it. Don't feel like doing it right now. Maybe another day. Maybe another video. We'll see. Yeah, guys, I recommend watching the Adam Carolla Show on YouTube. It's Catch a Contractor, I think, if you're interested in this stuff. California was one of the most lenient about this, and California has enormous overcapacity, enormous overcrowding, in their prisons. Australia is export-based. I don't know if all their economy is export-based anymore. They have a lot of their GDP in construction, real estate, that type of stuff now. It's not all export-based anymore. Just like Canada used to be very export-based, and a lot of the Canadian economy has gone into Canadian consumer. Okay, guys, well, I'm tired, and I will put over 10 of these articles, including the video here that came out on August 19th about investigating Australia's apartment building crisis. I will put that. It's got a lot of likes compared to dislikes, so apparently it's a popular video. And I'll put that at the end of this video if you want to watch that too, if you want to learn more about the problems going on in Australia. But, this is going to hurt a lot of people in Australia because all we have to do is look back at the damage that this did here in the United States. Now, I do not think that Australia has anywhere near the $5.7 trillion in derivatives that the U.S. had tied to the housing bubble here, but that doesn't mean there can't be a lot of pain. The U.S. had an enormous, ridiculous amount of derivatives, including collateralized mortgage obligations, credit default swaps, all these different types of mortgage-backed securities, CMOs, CDOs, credit default swaps, all these things tied to housing. I do not think Australia has that, but it sounds like there's a ridiculously feverish pitch to bidding on basically pieces of junk in Sydney, and people are buying them up, paying way over the bidding price, over $400,000 over the bidding price. So everyone have a great week. Here in the United States, Labor Day is coming up tomorrow, and we'll see if I make a video or not. I will take a look for other interesting topics, and I'll work on getting some potential good guest interviews. I should probably try to get that Tavi Costa guy. I've been following his work more on Twitter with good charts, and he's a hedge fund manager. So we can have an interesting discussion because you guys keep asking me these questions in the live chat there. Which country is gonna collapse first? Which asset bubble is gonna collapse first? Which credit bubble is gonna collapse first? Well, this guy, this is his job. He sets up trades. He looks at all of the research on this. He's getting paid probably good money to do this stuff. So why not ask someone who spends even more time doing this probably than I do? Okay, bye for now.